Imagine for a moment, standing on a quiet field that trembles beneath the synchronized march of thousands of soldiers. The air shimmers with the rhythm of iron and leather, the ground echoing under the disciplined steps of men trained to perfection. In front of you stretches a wall of spears, 6 meters long, gleaming under the sun like a field of silver needles. The wall moves, advancing with slow, inevitable force, each step bringing death closer. This was the Macedonian Phalanx, the deadliest military formation of the ancient world. The same weapon that Alexander the Great used to conquer the known world. For over a century, no army could withstand its charge. The Phalanx was considered invincible, an engine of war so perfect that it reshaped the world map. But every weapon, no matter how mighty, eventually meets the force that breaks it. And on a cloudy morning in 197 BC, in the rolling hills of Thessaly, this wall of spears would meet its doom. The world would watch as the invincible fell, not to superior strength or numbers, but to something far more subtle. A new way of fighting, a new way of thinking. To understand how such an unshakable military system could be destroyed, we must travel backward through time to the age when this instrument of conquest was first born.
No longer shall Macedon hold you in her shadow.
We must return to the man who envisioned it.
Not conquest, but
Philip II of Macedon,
Thessaly is our objective.
the father of Alexander the Great.
On our terms. We will
When
not allow
Philip
this
ascended
war
to the
drag
throne
on.
in
Decisive action
359
is
BC,
paramount.
Macedonia was not a power. It was a fractured, vulnerable kingdom surrounded by enemies. To the great Greek city-states of the south, Athens, Sparta, Thebes, the Macedonians were viewed as rustic northerners, half-barbarians, unworthy of political respect. But Philip was not a man content with contempt. As a young hostage in Thebes, he had seen the power of Greek warfare firsthand. There, he studied the hoplite phalanx, disciplined soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder behind large shields, each carrying a spear about 8 feet long. It was a formidable system, but Philip saw its limits. The formation was too rigid, too dependent on flat ground, and its range too short. He began to imagine something revolutionary, an army that could strike before the enemy ever reached it. A living wall of spear points that would make even the bravest soldier hesitate. When Philip returned to Macedonia, he transformed his army from a loose collection of peasant levies into a professional war machine. His genius lay not just in vision, but in execution. He redesigned everything, from the armor to the training regimen. His masterpiece was a new weapon, the sarissa, a spear so long, 5 to 6 meters, that it dwarfed anything used before. With these monstrous spears, the Macedonian phalanx could strike the enemy from a distance that made counterattack almost impossible. The first 5 ranks of soldiers could lower their sarissas in perfect unison, creating an impenetrable hedge of steel.
Today, we have not
To face
merely
it
won a
was
battle,
to charge into a
but
storm
reshaped
of
the very
points.
destiny of Rome.
Behind them,
Look to those
additional
distant
ranks
hills.
angled their weapons upward, ready to lower them as the front lines fell, ensuring the deadly forest never thinned. But this innovation came at a cost. The sarissa was so heavy that it required both hands, forcing soldiers to abandon the
my
large,
officers,
round shields
is
of
the
traditional
sarissa.
hoplites.
It shall be
Instead,
an impenetrable hedge
They
of
carried a
steel.
small shield strapped to the left arm,
Hold them as
a
one.
pelt, just large enough to cover the shoulder.
Move as a single beast,
Armor was lightened,
Macedonians.
mobility increased.
The phalanx holds
Philip
the line.
understood that defense
The
was no
cavalry
longer the
breaks
goal.
it.
Momentum
This
was.
is our complete
Yet weapons
war
alone
machine.
do not make an army invincible. The true secret was discipline. Philip drilled his soldiers relentlessly. They trained not as part-time warriors, but as professionals, learning to march, wheel, and strike as one. To maintain formation while advancing over uneven ground with 20-foot spears required absolute coordination, a rhythm of movement that bordered on choreography. Every man became a cog in a larger mechanism, a living machine of bronze and iron. The Macedonian Phalanx was typically 16 ranks deep, each soldier standing close enough that his shield overlapped with his neighbor's. When it moved forward, it did so like a single organism,
Push them back!
a slow, crushing tide that rolled over anything in its path. Enemies described facing it as standing before an endless forest of spearheads,
Ready
advancing
spears.
with terrifying silence until the first impact shattered the stars. But Philip was more than a tactician. He was a strategist. He knew the Phalanx could not win battles alone. Its great strength, its unity and front-facing power was also its weakness. It was vulnerable on the flanks.
Carthage is no
To
longer
protect it,
Rome's singular focus.
He created a combined
Our
arms
destiny
system,
now lies
integrating
east,
cavalry,
among the
archers,
Hellenes.
and light infantry into a single
Macedonia's
coordinated
aggressive
force.
posturing threatens the peace of all
On the wings
Hellas,
of his formation
Rome
rode
cannot
the elite
stand idly
companion
by.
cavalry,
Rome's peace.
heavily armored horsemen led by Philip himself or by his most trusted officers. Their role was decisive. They waited until the
Rome
enemy was
comes
locked in
not as a
combat with the
conqueror,
Phalanx,
but as a
then
liberator.
swept around to crush
Your
them from the
freedom
side
Macedonian
or rear.
tyranny is our
Ahead of the
singular
main
goal.
formation marched skirmishers, archers and javelin throwers, who harassed the enemy and disrupted their ranks before the Phalanx struck. This was not merely an army. It was a symphony of destruction. Philip's reforms changed everything. With his new army, he subjugated the Greek city-states one by one, culminating in the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC. There, the Macedonian Phalanx, supported by the
line,
companion
push them back.
cavalry, shattered the combined forces of Athens and Thebes, the greatest military powers of the Greek world. The unthinkable had happened. Greece, the cradle of military excellence, was conquered by the northern kingdom it once mocked. When Philip was assassinated 2 years later, he left behind not only a unified
Forward,
Greece,
legions!
but a military
Break their
engine
line!
of unprecedented power. And at its head stood his 20-year-old son, Alexander. If Philip built the weapon, Alexander was the one who wielded it like a god. Under his command, the Macedonian Phalanx became the spine of an empire. He took his father's creation and used it to break the world. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed into Asia with roughly 50,000 men, tiny compared to the Persian Empire's vast armies. But what he lacked in numbers, he made up for in brilliance. At the Battle of the Granicus, the Phalanx held the center while Alexander led the cavalry in a bold strike across a river, routing the Persian lines. A year later, at Issus, he faced King Darius III's massive host and crushed it. And in 331 BC, at Gaugamela, the greatest test came. The Persians outnumbered Alexander 4-1. Their chariots had blades on their wheels designed to slice through ranks of men like wheat. Yet when the charge came, Alexander's Phalanx calmly opened its lines, allowing the chariots to pass harmlessly through. Waiting reserves destroyed them as they emerged. The Sarissas advanced, the cavalry struck, and the Persian Empire fell. Everywhere Alexander went, the Phalanx led the way. It became more than a formation. It was a symbol of divine order and human mastery. To see it move was to witness perfection in motion. It seemed impossible that anything could defeat it. When Alexander died suddenly in 323 BC, his empire stretched from Greece to India. He left no heir, only generals, the Diadochi, his successors, who divided the empire and turned his dream into chaos. They fought one another for decades, carving new kingdoms out of the ruins of conquest. Yet all of them shared one thing: the Phalanx. From Egypt under the Ptolemies, to Syria under the Seleucids, to
A new
Macedonia
era
itself
dawns,
under the Antigonid
shaped
dynasty,
by resilience.
the Macedonian Phalanx remained the backbone of every army. For nearly a century after Alexander's death, it continued to dominate the battlefields of the eastern Mediterranean. But while the Hellenistic kings fought among themselves, a new power was rising in the west, a city of disciplined soldiers and relentless ambition. Its armies did not march in long, rigid lines, but moved like living organisms, able to bend and adapt to any terrain. Its citizens were not subjects of a king, but soldiers of a republic. That city was Rome, and one day, the unyielding wall of the Macedonian Phalanx would meet the flexible mind of the Roman legion. As the Hellenistic kings quarreled over Alexander's inheritance, a quiet power was awakening far to the west, beyond the blue waters of the Adriatic Sea. It did not boast marble palaces or divine bloodlines, nor did it seek glory through the elegance of philosophy or art. It grew instead from discipline, duty, and an unshakable belief that no hardship was too great for those who served the Republic. That power was Rome. At first, Rome was merely one city among many on the Italian peninsula. It fought not for empire, but for survival. Surrounded by rival tribes, it learned through endless wars that adaptability was the key to endurance. The early Romans had imitated the Greek style of fighting, forming phalanxes of their own. But Italy's rugged hills and unpredictable terrain quickly revealed the limits of that method. The Macedonian-style phalanx worked best on open plains, where soldiers could stand shoulder to shoulder in perfect lines. But in the rocky valleys and forests of Italy, such formations broke apart. Rome needed something new. Gradually, through trial and necessity, the Romans abandoned the rigid wall and developed a system that would one day destroy it. They divided their army into smaller, more flexible units, called maniples, each consisting of about 120 men. These maniples could move independently, advance or retreat as needed, and adapt their formations to the contours of the land. Instead of one great wall, the Roman army became a living mosaic of shifting blocks, each capable of fighting, maneuvering, or supporting the others. The soldiers themselves, the legionaries, carried equipment unlike anything seen before. Their shields were large and rectangular, curved to protect most of the body. These scuta formed walls when interlocked, yet allowed freedom of movement. Each soldier also carried two heavy javelins, called pila, designed to pierce armor or lodge into enemy shields, making them useless. Once thrown, the legionary drew his gladius, a short, double-edged sword made for thrusting in close combat. The phalanx was a weapon of reach. The legion was a weapon of precision. Roman training reflected this philosophy. Soldiers drilled not only as units, but also as individuals. They learned to fight alone, in pairs, or in groups, adapting to the situation. Their discipline was legendary. Every man could march for miles in full armor, build a fortified camp at the end of each day, and then rise to fight the next morning without complaint. To be Roman was to be both a soldier and a builder, a destroyer and a maker of order. By the 3rd century before Christ, this system had hardened Rome into a war machine. Its legions conquered neighboring tribes, subdued rival cities, and extended Roman influence across Italy. But beyond its borders, a different kind of power ruled the seas. Carthage, the merchant empire of North Africa. When Rome and Carthage clashed, the world trembled. The Punic Wars would become tests of endurance unlike anything before. Hannibal, Carthage's greatest general, led his elephants across the Alps to invade Italy itself. For 16 years, he ravaged the Roman countryside, winning brilliant victories at Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae. Yet Rome refused to die. Defeat after defeat, it rebuilt its armies. No matter how many legions Hannibal destroyed, new ones rose to replace them. The Republic could absorb disaster and keep fighting. It was this resilience, this stubborn refusal to yield, that made Rome unstoppable. When Carthage was finally broken and Hannibal forced into exile, Rome turned its gaze eastward. There, in the lands of Greece and Macedonia, ancient kingdoms still clung to their glory. Among them was Macedonia itself, now ruled by Philip V, a descendant of the great Philip and Alexander. He still commanded armies trained in the traditional way, his soldiers carrying the long sarissas that had once conquered Persia. To the Greeks, Philip was both protector and oppressor, a king whose ambition threatened the freedom of their cities. To the Romans, he was an obstacle standing between them and the wealth of the Eastern world. During the Second Punic War, Philip had secretly allied himself with Hannibal, hoping to share in Rome's destruction. When that plan failed, Rome did not forget. Soon after Hannibal's defeat, Roman envoys arrived in Greece, accusing Philip of aggression and treachery. Behind their words was an unspoken message. The Republic was coming. In 200 BC, Rome declared war on Macedonia. It was the Second Macedonian War, and it would decide which civilization would rule the Mediterranean. At first, the campaign was slow. The Macedonian heartland was mountainous and difficult, its people fiercely loyal to their king. Roman armies marched through narrow passes, harassed by ambushes and starvation. Philip avoided open battle, retreating when pressed and striking when he saw advantage. The Romans found themselves frustrated by terrain and weather, fighting an enemy that refused to meet them face to face. Then, in 198 BC, a new commander took charge of the Roman forces in Greece, Titus Quinctius Flamininus. He was only 32, young for such a responsibility, but possessed of intelligence, charm, and a gift for diplomacy. He did not simply command armies. He understood people. While preparing for war, he courted the favor of Greek city-states tired of Macedonian rule. He spoke of freedom and liberation, portraying Rome as a friend, not a conqueror. Slowly, cities turned against Philip. Flamininus also understood that chasing the Macedonian king through the mountains was futile. Instead, he struck at Thessaly, Macedonia's granary, forcing Philip into open battle. For a time, both armies maneuvered through fog and confusion, each searching for the other amid the hills. Finally, in the spring of 197 BC, fate brought them together in a place called Cynoscephalae, the Dog's Heads, so named for the shape of its twin hills. It was not ideal ground for either army, broken and uneven, veiled that morning in thick mist. Yet there, the ancient world's greatest military formation would face its greatest test. Neither side knew exactly where the other camped. As dawn broke through the fog, both sent out scouts to locate the enemy. These small forces, light infantry and cavalry, climbed the hills and by chance collided in the mist. What began as a minor skirmish quickly escalated. Reinforcements arrived, first in handfuls, then by hundreds. The fighting grew fierce. Macedonian horsemen pushed the Romans back. The Romans countered. Each commander, uncertain of the scale of the engagement, began feeding more troops into the fray. Philip soon received word that his forward units were heavily engaged. He hesitated. His camp lay in a strong defensive position, and the ground ahead was far from ideal for his phalanx. Yet his pride as a king and general, and his unwillingness to abandon men already fighting, compelled him to act. He ordered his army to prepare for battle and began to advance up the hills toward the sound of combat. Thousands of phalangites moved forward, their long sarissas glinting through the fog. The climb was steep, the ground uneven, and maintaining formation was exhausting work. Still, the veterans of Macedonia pressed on. At last, Philip's right wing reached the crest and began to form the line. The left, however, lagged behind, still struggling up the slopes in scattered groups. Flamininus, watching from below, saw both the danger and the opportunity. The Macedonians were taking the high ground, but their formation was divided. He could either retreat to safer ground or attack before the phalanx fully deployed. Retreat meant losing the initiative. Attack meant facing the dreaded Sarissa head-on. The decision came quickly. The Romans advanced. The legions climbed the slope, shields raised, swords ready. Their maniples spread out, adapting to the contours of the land, leaving gaps for movement and support. When they reached the crest, they met the Macedonian right wing, already formed, ready, deadly. Philip's men lowered their sarissas as one. The forest of spears bristled forward, descending with the weight of iron and gravity combined. The impact was terrifying. The Roman front ranks staggered, their shields pierced, their lines bent beneath the pressure. The downhill momentum of the phalanx seemed unstoppable. For a moment, it appeared that history would repeat itself, that the ancient weapon of Alexander would triumph again. The Roman left wing buckled, some units falling back, others crushed underfoot. But as the Macedonian right pressed forward, the rest of the army was still forming. The left wing of Philip's phalanx, delayed by terrain, remained disorganized, its ranks uneven, its sarissas entangled. It was at this moment that Flamininus's instincts saved Rome. He saw that while one part of his army was being overwhelmed, another faced an enemy not yet ready. He turned to his right wing and ordered an immediate attack. The Roman maniples surged forward before the Macedonians could align their ranks. The Phalangites struggled to lower their sarissas, some colliding with their own men. The terrain was too rough, their formation too stretched. Gaps opened, and through those gaps poured the legionaries. Once inside the reach of the long spears, the Romans were unstoppable. The Macedonian soldiers, their small shields strapped to their arms, could barely defend themselves. Their sarissas, so deadly at range, were useless at arm's length. The legionaries pressed in close, stabbing with their short swords beneath shields and into exposed flesh. The Macedonian left wing began to break. Panic spread. Some dropped their weapons and fled downhill. Others were cut down where they stood. Still, the Macedonian right continued its advance, driving back the Romans before them. The battle had split into two halves, one side of Philip's army victorious, the other collapsing. What happened next would decide not only the battle, but the fate of nations. Among the Roman ranks was an unnamed tribune, a mid-level officer commanding about 20 maniples, 2,000 men. Seeing the Macedonian left in full retreat, he acted without waiting for orders. Instead of pursuing the fleeing soldiers, he wheeled his men across the hill, marching behind the crest and striking directly at the rear of the Macedonian right. It was an act of initiative that no Macedonian officer could have matched. The result was chaos. The phalanx, engaged to the front and pressed from behind, had no way to respond. Its strength lay in its unity and direction. It could only move forward as one. Now it was trapped. The sarissas pointed uselessly toward the enemy in front, while Roman swords cut through the unprotected rear. Men tried to turn, but their 20-foot spears collided with those of their comrades. The tight formation dissolved into confusion. The Macedonian right, moments ago triumphant, began to collapse under pressure from two sides. The Romans who had been retreating suddenly counterattacked. Surrounded and unable to fight effectively, the Phalangites fell by the thousands. Their discipline shattered. The phalanx that had conquered the world was no more. When the sun set over the hills of Cynoscephalae, the ground was strewn with Macedonian dead. 8,000 men had fallen. 5,000 more were captured. The Romans lost only a fraction of that number. The age of the Sarissa had ended. The hills of Thessaly were quiet again when the killing stopped. The fog that had cloaked the morning now lay heavy with smoke, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood. The cries of the wounded echoed across the ridges. Men who had once marched in perfect rhythm now lay scattered in ruin, their long sarissas jutting uselessly into the sky. The Macedonian Phalanx, that once mighty engine of conquest, had been broken, not by greater numbers, not by divine wrath, but by a new way of war. As the Roman soldiers moved among the fallen, collecting trophies and tending to their comrades, Flamininus stood upon a hill and watched the scene unfold. He was only 32 years old, yet he had just changed the course of history. The Battle of Cynoscephalae had lasted only a few hours, but its consequences would echo for centuries. The formation that had conquered Persia and carried Alexander to the edge of the world had been destroyed by the flexibility of the Roman legion. Philip of Macedon, realizing the day was lost, gathered what remained of his royal guard and rode from the battlefield. His proud army, his inheritance from generations of kings, was gone. He had fought bravely and led with skill, but he had faced an enemy whose system could bend where his could not. A few years later, he would be forced to sign a humiliating peace. Macedonia was stripped of its allies and its navy, forbidden from expanding, and burdened with tribute. For the first time in over a century, the descendants of Alexander were subjects, not rulers. Yet the lesson of Cynoscephalae was not just about who won or lost a single battle. It was about the evolution of warfare itself. For generations, armies had been built on rigidity, on the belief that strength came from unity, order, and the unbroken line. The phalanx was the ultimate expression of that belief. Each man depended entirely on the man beside him. Together, they formed a wall that could not be penetrated. But that very perfection was its weakness. When the ground was uneven, when the line was bent, when confusion entered the ranks, the whole system failed. The Romans had created something different. Their Manipular legion was not a single wall, but a living organism made of smaller, independent parts. Each maniple could act on its own, adapt to terrain, exploit weaknesses, and respond to unexpected opportunities. The legion was flexible without being chaotic, disciplined without being rigid. It could fight in mountains, forests, or plains. It could recover from mistakes, reorganize, and counterattack. That adaptability, the true secret weapon, was what destroyed the Macedonian Phalanx. The victory at Cynoscephalae did more than end a war. It announced the dawn of a new age. Within a few years, Macedonia had become a client state, and Greece itself was brought under Roman influence. The Eastern Mediterranean, once ruled by the heirs of Alexander, now bowed to the legions of the Republic. But history would prove that Cynoscephalae was only the beginning. Decades later, in 168 BC, the grandson of Philip I, King Perseus, would attempt to restore Macedonia's lost glory. He raised another great army, trained again in the ancient style, armed with the same long spears and heavy pride. The Romans met him at Pydna, and once more the two systems clashed. The battle began on flat terrain, perfect for the phalanx. At first, the Macedonian advance was terrifying. The wall of spears rolled forward like an iron tide, driving the Roman front lines back. Even the Roman commander, Lucius Aemilius Paulus, later admitted that he had never seen anything so dreadful as the moving forest of Sarissas. But as the battle wore on, the terrain shifted. The Macedonians advanced over uneven ground, and their perfect formation began to break. Small gaps appeared between the ranks, barely noticeable at first, but fatal against an enemy like Rome. The legionaries, trained to act independently, slipped through the openings, turning the flanks and stabbing into the vulnerable sides of the phalangites. Within minutes, the great formation dissolved. The Romans butchered the trapped soldiers where they stood. Perseus fled. Macedonia fell forever. This time, there would be no client kingdom, no mercy. Rome divided Macedonia into 4 puppet republics and later absorbed it entirely as a Roman province. The dynasty of Philip and Alexander, the line that had once ruled from Egypt to India, was erased from the earth. The age of the Hellenistic kings was ending, and the age of Rome had begun. The pattern repeated again and again. When the Seleucid Empire in the east faced Rome at the Battle of Magnesia, its phalanx, reinforced with war elephants and scythe chariots, was crushed by the same adaptable Roman system. No matter how mighty the formation, no matter how long the spears, the result was always the same. The Macedonian way of war, once the most advanced system on earth, had become obsolete. It would be easy to think that the phalanx was simply inferior, but that is not the truth. Under ideal conditions, flat terrain, steady ground, open space, it was still one of the most powerful formations ever devised. Its killing power was immense, its discipline unmatched. Yet war is rarely ideal. The world is not made of perfect plains. Battles unfold in chaos, confusion, and uncertainty. In such conditions, flexibility outweighs perfection. The Romans understood that. Their genius lay not in creating stronger soldiers or sharper weapons, but in designing a system that could adapt to change. Behind that military adaptability was a deeper strength: the Roman state itself. The Republic had nearly limitless manpower drawn from its vast citizen population and allies. When it lost an army, it could raise another. Its soldiers were not mercenaries, but citizens fighting for the survival and honor of their homeland. Its commanders, from tribunes to consuls, were trained to think, to act independently, and to seize opportunity. It was this combination of civic discipline, flexibility, and endurance that made Rome unstoppable. By contrast, the Hellenistic kingdoms were built upon fragile foundations. Their armies were professional but narrow, dependent on small corps of Macedonian elites ruling over subject peoples. Their soldiers fought for kings, the Romans fought for a republic. When a Macedonian army was destroyed, it could not easily be replaced. When a Roman army fell, 10 more stood ready. The outcome of the ancient world was not decided by one battle alone, but by systems, one that could change and one that could not. In time, Rome's legions would sweep across the Mediterranean, conquering Greece, Asia Minor, and eventually Egypt itself. The same flexibility that had broken the phalanx at Cynoscephalae would carry Roman standards to every corner of the known world. The disciplined march of the legion would become the heartbeat of empire, and for 5 centuries, no force would rival it. Yet even in triumph, there were lessons deeper than conquest. The story of the Macedonian Phalanx and its destruction is not merely a tale of war. It is a parable of progress and decline. Every system, no matter how strong, eventually faces change. The phalanx represented perfection through rigidity. The legion represented mastery through adaptability. The first was a monument to control, the second a celebration of evolution. In the long arc of history, it is always the adaptable who endure. The Roman tribune who acted without orders on that misty morning at Cynoscephalae embodied the essence of Rome's success. He saw an opportunity and seized it, trusting his judgment and training. His decision, made in a moment, changed the fate of nations. In the Macedonian army, such initiative would have been impossible. The phalanx demanded obedience, not creativity. But Rome had learned that victory belonged to those who could think in the chaos of battle, not just follow the plan. Even beyond the battlefield, the lesson endures. Empires, institutions, and individuals all face the same test, whether to cling to old forms or to adapt to new realities. The Macedonian Phalanx was a masterpiece of its age, but its perfection was a prison. When the world changed, it could not. The Romans, less elegant but more versatile, became masters of change itself. And so, on that gray morning in 197 BC, amid the fog and blood of the Thessalian hills, the destiny of the Western world shifted. The spears of Alexander fell before the swords of Rome. From that day forward, the legion, not the phalanx, would define the art of war. The Mediterranean would speak Latin, not Greek. The dream of Macedonia faded into memory, while the eagle of Rome rose to dominate the horizon for centuries to come. Yet perhaps there is another lesson hidden beneath the clash of armies and the cries of the dying. History is not only the record of power, but of providence. Men forge their weapons, march their soldiers, and shape their empires. But the ultimate course of nations lies beyond their grasp. Philip built an army to rule Greece. Alexander used it to conquer Asia. Rome shattered it to rule the world. Each believed they controlled their destiny, yet each was merely a chapter in a greater story written by time itself. When we look back upon Cynoscephalae, we see not only the fall of a formation, but the triumph of adaptability over arrogance, evolution over stagnation. It reminds us that no system, no matter how brilliant, can remain supreme forever. Power belongs not to the strongest or the most intelligent, but to those who can change. The Macedonian Phalanx had once ruled the world, but on that mist-covered hill in Thessaly, it met its end at the hands of men who understood that survival is not about perfection, but about transformation. And so the march of Rome began, steady, disciplined, unstoppable. The echo of its footsteps carried across centuries, shaping the laws, the languages, and the legacies of the world that followed. The Battle of Cynoscephalae was not merely a victory of one army over another. It was the moment the future conquered the past,